The briefing lasted 14 seconds. That was all our chorus needed. 14 seconds to absorb the threat matrix, parse the trajectory models, catalog the weapon signatures of the single vessel that had crossed into veil space without clearance, without escort, and this was the detail the war singers found almost charming, any apparent awareness of what it had wandered into. 14 seconds. We had ended civilizations in less. My name, rendered into syllables a human throat could attempt, approximates something like Zenvarak. I was, a tactician of the third harmonic caste, chorus collective, veteran of the Varathi engagement, the Sulk campaign, the Pale Armada dissolution. I had 41 cycles of active command. I had never filed an after-action report that carried the word loss in any meaningful column. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this so you understand what it meant when I started losing sleep over a dented cup. The vessel had crossed veil boundary at 0340 collective standard. Our perimeter arrays caught it on the third sweep, flagged it on the fourth, and by the fifth sweep, our chorus had already assembled a response formation and was discussing which junior wing to assign cleanup duty. That was what this was. Cleanup, a single ship, carbon alloy hull, primitive directed energy arrays, propulsion technology we had categorized as roughly equivalent to what we ourselves used 4 centuries ago. Our scouts had already designated its class, Whisper Grade, barely worth the notation in the margin. The insult of being assigned cleanup sat in my chest like a warm stone. Not anger, something smaller, the mild indignity of a master painter being handed a whitewash brush and told to do a garden wall. I remember reviewing the initial scan data in the minutes before the engagement and finding exactly one interesting thing about the vessel. Just one. Not the weapons. Conventional, outmatched, almost nostalgic in their simplicity. Not the shielding, present but thin, the kind that makes the difference between 1 hit and 2 before the structure fails. Not the crew count. 109 life signatures, a number so modest it felt like a rounding error. The one interesting thing was this. The vessel was not running. Our perimeter alarms went active. Standard protocol. Every ship in the quadrant receives the signature, understands what it means, and the response is always, without exception, the same. Turn, flee, or open a channel and begin negotiations for the privilege of not being destroyed. The human vessel reduced speed. Then it turned. Toward us. I flagged this in my tactical notation under a category I had to create on the spot because no existing category covered it. I called it Anomalous Approach Behavior. Origin unclear. Then I set it aside. There were 9 possible explanations, ranging from navigation malfunction to a crew that had not yet received the perimeter signal properly. The most unlikely explanation, that the vessel understood exactly where it was and was choosing to move toward us. I ranked 9th. I ranked it 9th because nothing rational moves toward 47 warships on purpose. The vessel's designation came through on the 43rd translation pass. Our linguists had been working through the hull markings since the first scan, parsing their letter system, cross-referencing databases of human naming conventions. 2 words. ISV consequence. I filed this under irrelevant. My chorus sister Vel, who handled cultural intelligence for our wing, sent me a brief notation beside the designation. It said only, their naming conventions for vessels often carry intentional meaning. I did not respond. We were 2 minutes from engagement. The formation we deployed was called the Trisect Bloom. 3 wings, converging in overlapping arcs, designed to catch any vessel attempting lateral escape in a crossfire that had no viable exit. It had ended the Varathi expansion. It had broken the Sulk hegemony. Against the Pale Armada, a fleet of 312 ships, it had produced results so complete that we stopped counting at some point and simply noted, engagement concluded. Against one Whisper-grade vessel, it was like using a thunderstorm to extinguish a candle. I want to be clear about what happened next. The Trisect Bloom is not a blunt instrument. It requires precise timing across 3 wings. It requires the target to do what every rational target does. Attempt escape, angle for the thinnest point in the formation, burn propulsion in search of a gap. The bloom accounts for all of that. Every escape vector is sealed. The mathematics are exact. The mathematics assumed the target would try to escape. Our first salvo landed exactly as calculated. 3 wings, simultaneous. The energy impact across the Consequence's hull registered at 94% of our projected total. Accounting for minor variance, that was essentially a perfect hit. The Consequence flew through it. Not around it. Not with some technology we had failed to detect. Through. It took the hit the way a stone takes rain. The port energy array exploded. Hull integrity failed in sections 2, 4, and 7. Atmosphere vented from 2 compartments. Our damage projections said the vessel was now operating at 61% structural capacity, that its port-side weapons were gone, and that any rational crew would be preparing emergency protocols. The Consequence accelerated. In my 41 cycles of command, I had never paused a tactical response to simply stare at a data readout. I paused. I stared. Vel's notation appeared in my peripheral feed again. Small. Quiet. It said, "Flag for review. Approach behavior inconsistent with all known contact profiles." I approved the flag. Then I requested a secondary damage assessment from our weapons wing because I was certain the first one contained an error. It did not contain an error. The Consequence, with a destroyed port array, vented compartments, and hull integrity failing in 3 sections, was now moving faster than it had been when the battle began. I heard Vel's harmonic shift in the chorus. Not words, not yet, just a fractional dissonance. The way a single instrument in a large ensemble goes slightly off-key, and only the conductor catches it. We had not yet begun to understand what was happening. We had not yet received the transmission. That came 40 seconds later. Our linguistics team intercepted an audio broadcast from the Consequence, not directed at us, not a hail, not a surrender request or an ultimatum. It was being broadcast on an open channel, the way you might leave a door open when you go outside, because you intend to come right back. It was a song, percussion-heavy, a human voice, singular, rough at the edges, carrying a melody that moved in a way I could only describe as purposeful, not decorative music, not ceremonial, but something that served a function, the way a tool serves a function. The words took our translators 3 passes. The translation that came back read, loosely, "This will not be quick, and that suits me just fine." I listened to it twice. Then I requested a full scan of all human cultural archives related to the practice of playing music during armed conflict. The archive came back with 47,000 entries. 47,000. The chorus, reading the same data at the same moment, went briefly and completely silent for 0.8 seconds, the first collective silence I had ever witnessed in active engagement. Then the harmony resumed, and my request for a fleet recall was noted, logged, and voted down 6-1, and the trisect bloom tightened, and we committed to the second phase of engagement. I was the one who voted to stop. I remember thinking, in that quiet between votes, that I needed to change the category I had created for the Consequence's approach behavior. Anomalous approach behavior. Origin unclear was no longer accurate. The origin was becoming very clear. I just did not have a word for it yet. The word came later. It came the way most honest things come, at the worst possible moment, too late to be useful, early enough to be haunting. But I am getting ahead of myself. This is the part of the account where I should tell you we adjusted our formation, tightened the bloom, brought in the secondary wing, committed to Phase 2 with the kind of methodical confidence that comes from 41 cycles of doing this, and never once being surprised in a way that mattered. I should tell you that. What I will tell you instead is that I spent the 8 seconds between the vote and the Phase 2 order looking at one specific data readout on my secondary screen. The Consequence's speed. Still climbing. We had destroyed its port array. We had compromised its hull in 3 places. We had hit it with enough coordinated energy to disable a vessel twice its class. And it was moving faster than when we had started. I filed this under a new category. I called it, "I do not know what this is." It was the most accurate notation I had made in 41 cycles. The second phase of engagement began cleanly. Our chorus had recalibrated after the first phase anomaly, adjusted the bloom angles, tightened the timing window, redistributed the weapons load across the remaining functional wings. On a tactical display, it looked like a net being drawn closed around something that had nowhere left to go. On the actual readout, the Consequence was still climbing in speed. I want to explain what that means in terms of the physics involved, because it is the kind of thing that sounds like an exaggeration when stated plainly. A vessel that has lost significant hull integrity does not accelerate. The compromise of structural sections creates drag imbalances, propulsion inefficiencies, cascading failures that compound each other. Every mechanical model we possessed, every damage assessment algorithm built across 4 centuries of combat engineering, agreed on this point absolutely. A vessel that damaged does not go faster. It slows. It bleeds velocity the way it bleeds atmosphere, gradually, then all at once. The consequence went faster. Our second salvo hit the starboard midsection. The damage register showed hull breach in section 12, total loss of a secondary propulsion node, and what our sensors read as a catastrophic failure in the vessel's coolant routing, which, in human ship design, meant that whatever systems were still running were now running hot in a way that accelerated their own eventual breakdown. The consequence corrected its heading toward us. Not toward an exit, not toward the thinnest point in the bloom, not toward any rational escape geometry. Toward us. Vel broke harmony. Not for long, not dramatically. A fractional separation, 0.3 seconds, the kind of dissonance that shows up in a chorus record as a notation flag rather than an incident report. But in 22 years of serving alongside Vel, in operations that included the Pale Armada engagement where we lost 4 ships and 800 harmonic cast members, and the chorus held tone the entire time, Vel had never broken harmony. Not once. When she came back into the resonance, she said nothing. The moment passed. The engagement continued, but the flag was there in the record, and I pulled it up on my secondary screen and read her fracture notation, the thought that had pushed her out of collective tone, and it read, "It saw the bloom formation coming, and it flew through on purpose." I stared at that for longer than was tactically useful. Then our linguistics team flagged a new incoming transmission from the consequence, and I pulled my attention away from Vel's notation and focused on what was coming through. This one was not a broadcast. This one was internal communications, which meant we had cracked their encoding, a development that our intelligence cast logged as a significant operational victory. We were inside their channel now. We could hear everything. I want to tell you that this helped us. I want to tell you that better intelligence produced better outcomes, and that the tactical picture clarified, and the engagement proceeded with renewed confidence. The first thing I heard on the cracked channel was laughter. Not the nervous, high-pitched sound that species under duress produce when communication becomes erratic and involuntary. Not panic wearing a thin costume. Genuine laughter. 2 voices, somewhere in the vessel's secondary operations deck based on the signal routing, laughing at something one of them had said. Our translation came back 14 seconds later. Voice 1. My console just told me we're venting Atmo in Section 7. Do you know what's in Section 7? Voice 2. The good coffee. Voice 1. The good coffee. Silence. Then both of them, together, in a sound our translation matrix labeled as shared amusement response, indicating resignation, and group solidarity. I ran this through 11 cultural interpretation models. All 11 agreed. The crew was aware of the damage, was aware of the atmosphere loss, was aware that what had been in Section 7 was now in open space, and their response to that information was to find it funny. Not the false humor of a species pretending to be unafraid, not performance bravado for the sake of morale maintenance. They genuinely found it funny. I am not equipped to fully explain what that did to my certainty, because the collective language does not have a precise word for the experience of watching your tactical framework stop making sense in real time. The closest approximation would be, the ground is behaving like water. You haven't fallen yet, but you've stopped trusting your feet. The voice we identified as the commanding officer came through the channel, 17 seconds after the laughter faded. Name, Vasiliev. Captain, Survey Class Designation, current post the ISV consequence. Human male, age indeterminate, from voice alone, vocal analysis returning, low register, unhurried cadence, a quality our interpretation matrix described as settled. Not calm, not artificially steady. Settled, the way an old building is settled, the kind of settled that comes from having been through enough weather, that weather has become familiar. He gave damage acknowledgement, in 11 words. Then he issued a course correction in 4. Then he asked, without any inflection shift, whether anyone had eyes on the port side relay coupling because, if it was still live, it needed to be cut before the backup array came online, or they would have a cascade. Someone answered. The coupling was dead. The backup array could come up clean. Vasiliev said good, and moved to the next thing. No pause. No wait on the 11-word damage acknowledgement. No moment of processing the reality that his ship had taken fire that should have ended the engagement 3 exchanges ago. He moved from damage to course correction to technical maintenance query, the way a carpenter moves from measurement to cut to finish. The same hand, the same rhythm, the next thing. I pulled up the full crew manifest from our pre-engagement scan. 109 life signatures. I cross-referenced with the damage assessment. The Section 7 atmosphere breach. The Section 2 structural failure. The Section 4 hull compromise. Casualties. Indeterminate from current sensor data. But the mathematics of those sections, the volume of exposed space, the time elapsed since the breach, the mathematics said there were fewer than 109 life signatures now. Vasiliev was giving a course correction order, with fewer people than he had started with, and his voice had the settled quality of an old building in familiar weather. I requested our second full fleet scan, prioritizing life signature tracking inside the consequence. I wanted a number. I wanted to know how many of them were gone, and how many were still functioning, and what the functional remainder's behavioral profile looked like at this level of attrition. The scan came back. I looked at the number. I set the scan down. I am going to tell you the number, but I am going to tell you something else first, because the number is not what matters most. What matters is what I did with the scan result. What matters is that I sat with it for 9 full seconds in the middle of an active engagement. 9 seconds during which my chorus was running Phase 2 recalibration, and Vel was back in harmony, and our weapons wing was preparing for the 3rd salvo. And I sat with the number, and I thought about an old building in familiar weather. 71. 71 life signatures remaining. 38 gone, between the first salvo and the sensor window. And the voice on the cracked channel ordering a course correction toward us did not sound like a being commanding 71. It sounded like a being commanding exactly the right number to do exactly what it intended to do next. I sent Vel a notation, 3 words, marked private, outside the chorus resonance. I had not sent a private notation in 11 cycles. The collective does not encourage them. The notation said, "What are they doing?" She responded in 4 seconds. Her notation said, "I think they decided before they got here." I read that. Read it again. Sent it to the back of my processing queue because the 3rd salvo window was opening, and the chorus needed my harmonic contribution, and there was no time, no space in the tactical rhythm, to sit with what Vel had said. But it was there, in the queue. The way a stone sits at the bottom of clear water, not going anywhere, visible from every angle, heavier than it looks. The 3rd salvo hit the consequence in the forward section. The consequence did not slow. I initiated the channel scan again. Wanted to hear Vasiliev. Wanted to hear whether the forward section hit had changed anything in the settled voice, produced any shift in cadence or register, any fracture in the unhurried rhythm. He was drinking something. That is what I heard. The small sound of a vessel being raised and lowered. Something thermal. The heat signature of the container registered on our bioenvironmental sensors as consistent with a heated liquid. He was drinking something warm while giving orders while his ship took fire in the forward section and lost more of the 109 it had started with. One of his crew asked for a heading confirmation. He gave it. Then he said, "Anyone who is not actively on a critical station, check on the person next to you." Not a welfare order in the clinical sense, not a protocol requirement. An instruction that assumed the people around you were worth checking on. That assumed the act of asking someone if they were all right was something you did, something that had a place in the middle of this, something that mattered right now the same way course corrections and backup arrays mattered. Check on the person next to you. I sat with that for longer than 9 seconds this time. The chorus did not notice. I was still in harmony. My tactical contributions were still arriving on time, still meeting precision benchmarks. But the part of me that would later become the only part of me, the singular voice, the I instead of the we, was sitting very still and sitting with a cup of warm liquid, and an instruction to check on the person next to you. I sent another private notation to Vel. It said, "I am requesting fleet recall again." She sent back, "I know." I sent the request. The vote came back, 6-1. I was still the one. The fourth salvo was already being calculated. On my secondary screen, the consequence corrected its heading for the third time. Still toward us. Faster, again. And in the back of my processing queue, like a stone at the bottom of clear water, the word I did not have yet was beginning to take shape, turning over slowly in the current, not ready to surface but present, already present, already heavier than anything I had filed under irrelevant. Our cultural database on humanity contained 412,000 entries. I know this number precisely because in the 17 minutes between the fourth salvo and the fifth phase weapons calibration, I ran a full index query on every entry that touched the following search parameters: armed conflict, crew behavior under damage conditions, command psychology during attrition events. The database returned 11,640 entries. I opened the first 30 and read them in sequence. Then I closed all 30 and sat in a state I can only describe as the moment before a very large piece of information lands on you, and you can feel it coming but you cannot move. Humanity has been at war. Not occasionally. Not in the way most species in the collective database engage in armed conflict, as a rupture in normal functioning, a crisis state that the civilization treats as an aberration and rushes to resolve. Humanity has been at war with itself, continuously, across its entire recorded history. Before they had the technology to reach other planets, they were destroying each other on the one they had. Before they had ships that could cross veil boundary, they were running the mathematics of mutual destruction on a scale that their own historians described, without apparent irony, as remarkable. They had not been visited by another civilization before us. They had not had an external threat to organize against, no common enemy to produce cohesion, no alien presence to interrupt the long argument they were apparently having with themselves about every possible thing. They had simply been doing this, to each other, for thousands of years. And the voice on the cracked channel, the settled voice in the body, that had been building things like the consequence, and pointing them at problems for as long as their recorded history went back, was the product of all of that. Every captain who had ever given a course correction order in a vessel that was falling apart. Every crew that had ever found the loss of the good coffee genuinely funny instead of devastating. Every generation of beings who had developed the specific skill of continuing to function at full capacity, while fully aware that the situation was ending. They had developed it by practicing on each other. For thousands of years. I want to tell you precisely what that felt like, in neurological terms, to understand. I cannot. The collective language does not have the vocabulary for it. What I can tell you is that the part of my harmonic resonance that was still in chorus tone became, at that moment, very thin, the way ice becomes thin in the places where the water is moving underneath, intact on the surface, compromised in structure. I pulled Vasiliev's channel back up. Someone was telling him that the secondary propulsion node was completely offline, not recoverable, and that they were operating on 62% thrust capacity. He acknowledged this in 3 words. Then he asked about the weapons status on the remaining arrays. The answer came back. Functional, charged, ready. He said, "Good. Then, keep the forward station open. I want eyes on their formation spacing." Then, the coffee. Someone tell me about the coffee situation. A voice from somewhere aft. Section 7 is gone, but there was a sealed emergency ration pack in the secondary galley. Lieutenant Oakes found it 20 minutes ago. Vasiliev, Oakes is getting a commendation. Not irony. Not the performance of normalcy to maintain morale through deliberate pretense. He meant it. In the middle of an engagement against 47 warships, with 38 of his crew gone, and his propulsion at 62%, and his hull failing in 4 sections now, the lieutenant who found the sealed emergency coffee ration was going to receive a formal commendation. I understood then what Vel had meant. I think they decided before they got here. They had not come into Veil space expecting to win. I want to be clear about that. I need to be clear about that, because everything that follows in this account depends on that understanding. What the consequence was doing was not an act of tactical optimism. It was not a calculated gamble that their weapons technology might somehow outperform our defense arrays, or that our formation might have a weakness they had identified and were attempting to exploit. They had come in knowing the mathematics. One ship, whisper grade, against our Veil Fleet standard deployment. They knew. And they had come anyway, and Vasiliev had asked about the coffee situation, and someone was getting a commendation, because they had made a decision at some point before they crossed the boundary. A decision I now understood the shape of, even though I could not yet name it, and that decision had made everything else secondary. The price, the cost, the mathematics of what this engagement would produce, in terms of the 109 life signatures that had been aboard when it started. They had looked at that number. They had decided it was acceptable. And then they had come to us. I sent Vel a notation, not 3 words this time, a longer one. I sent her the 11,640 database entries condensed into a single summary. I flagged the specific historical pattern I had identified, the consistent behavioral profile of human command units operating under severe attrition conditions. The way the behavioral profile did not degrade, did not fracture at the edges, did not produce the cascading decision failures that every other species in the database showed when loss crossed certain thresholds. Vel read it in 4 seconds. She came out of chorus harmony for the second time. This time she stayed out for 9 seconds. When she came back in, she sent me a notation. 5 words. It said, "We are not the threat." I looked at that for a long time. Then I looked at the tactical display, where the 5th salvo window was opening, and where the consequence was still on its heading toward us, and where 71 life signatures were doing things like finding coffee, and checking on the person next to them, and functioning, at every measurable level, like a crew that was completely fine. The 5th salvo hit the consequence in the port forward section. Atmosphere venting registered immediately. In the pause between impact and the next order on the cracked channel, I heard something I had not expected to hear. Not panic, not the sharp edge of a command structure under stress. A sound that our bioacoustic analysis labeled as follows: brief non-functional vocalization, consistent with surprise and physical response to impact, duration 1.2 seconds. Then Vasiliev's voice. Steady, settled, he said. Forward station, give me the count. The count, not the damage, not the structural status or the hull readings or the weapons calibration window, the count. A voice responded, and the translation came back, and the count was a number I am going to put into this record without context or explanation, because the context is already there, and the explanation is everything I have just written. The count was 64. Vasiliev said, 64. Then, that's enough. That is enough. In 41 cycles of command, in 11,640 database entries on human-armed conflict, I had never encountered a phrase that stopped me the way that one did. That is enough. Not a celebration, not a military declaration, not the language of victory or confidence, or tactical assessment. The language of a being who had made a calculation before he ever crossed the boundary, who had carried that calculation across every exchange and every salvo, and every cup of warm liquid in the dented thermal vessel, and who had just confirmed that the calculation was correct. They had what they needed, 64 of them, in a ship that was failing in more ways than I could track, against 47 warships, and they had what they needed to do what they had come to do. I requested fleet recall for the 3rd time. The vote came back before I had finished the request. 6-1. I was still the one. On the tactical display, the consequence stopped correcting its heading. It was already pointed at us. It did not need to correct anymore. There is a concept in chorus tactical doctrine called harmonic certainty. It is the state in which the collective reasoning of the assembled tactical minds produces a conclusion so thoroughly examined, so completely verified from every analytical angle, that the conclusion becomes the only possible truth, not confidence, certainty, the kind of mathematical finality that closes all remaining questions. Our chorus had reached harmonic certainty regarding this engagement, 14 seconds into the briefing. 1 whisper-grade vessel. Outcome, resolved. 41 cycles of command experience told me that harmonic certainty was the most reliable state in tactical decision-making. When the chorus reaches it, It is because the conclusion has been tested against every variable, every deviation, every scenario the assembled minds can construct, and it has survived all of them. I want to tell you that harmonic certainty had never failed us. It had not failed us. Not technically. The outcome the chorus had predicted was correct. The engagement produced the result we had designated at the 14-second mark. What harmonic certainty had not predicted, what it did not have a category for, what it could not have constructed a scenario to test against, was the cost. The consequence fired on the sixth exchange. Not a desperate last attempt. Not the erratic weapons output of a damaged ship making whatever it could from whatever remained functional. A precise, coordinated, double-array discharge from the starboard and forward weapons systems, the only two arrays still operational, fired in a pattern that our defensive models identified, too late, as a specific targeting solution. They had been building this shot since the third exchange. Every course correction, every heading adjustment, every movement that our tactical display had read as the consequence trying to close distance on the Bloom formation. They had been positioning, quietly, patiently. While we were counting salvo windows and recalibrating formation angles and logging damage assessments and discussing whether this cleanup operation was going to require a fourth phase, or whether 3 would be sufficient. They had been positioning. The shot hit our formation command relay. We lost 3 ships in the first 4 seconds, not from the direct impact, though 2 of those were direct impact, from the relay failure. Our trisect Bloom formation required constant micro-coordination across all 3 wings, timing adjustments, angle corrections, the kind of precision collective action that the chorus is specifically designed to enable. Without the relay, the coordination became manual. Manual coordination across 44 remaining vessels in an active engagement is not impossible. It is simply slower. Slower by a margin that most species would consider trivial. A fraction of a second in response windows. A degree or 2 in angle precision. Against a vessel that had spent 6 exchanges positioning for a specific shot, a fraction of a second was not trivial. It was everything. Our formation fractured. Not collapsed. The chorus held. We restructured, rapidly, the way a living thing restructures when part of it is removed. Not gracefully, but functionally. We lost the Bloom configuration and fell into a standard 3-ring defensive formation, which was less elegant, but still numerically overwhelming. The consequence was operating at 41% hull integrity. Secondary propulsion, gone. Starboard array had fired and was recharging. Forward array had fired and was partially gone. The discharge had taken out 2 of its 4 emitters. 64 life signatures. Vasiliev's voice on the channel. Weapons status. The answer. 1 array. Partial. 4 minutes to recharge. Forward station estimates 1 viable firing window before structural coherence in Section 3 fails completely. Vasiliev. 1 window. Then, position us for it. Position us for it. They were going to fire again. With a partial array. With 4 minutes of recharge time during which we would be hitting them with everything remaining in our restructured formation. With hull integrity at 41% and falling. With 1 viable window in a ship that was, by every mechanical standard we possessed, already past the point where function should have been possible. Position us for it. I pulled up the channel audio and listened to the 64. They were talking. Not the communications of a crew in crisis management mode, running damage control protocols, managing the cascade of systems that were failing in sequence around them. They were talking. Short sentences, some of them. Technical updates, yes, but threaded between those, a name called across a corridor, a question about whether someone had taken the last of the emergency rations, or if there were any left, a sound I identified as someone singing, very quietly, in the lower register, the same percussion-heavy melody from the open broadcast at the start of the engagement. Someone was singing while their ship was failing around them. And Vasiliev said, in the background of all of it, "Coffee, please, while we wait." I filed an emergency halt request with the Chorus High Command. Not a recall, a halt. A complete cessation of offensive action while I submitted a formal engagement review request, citing anomalous behavioral data requiring tactical reassessment before any further salvo commitment. It took longer than the recall requests. They had to process the formal filing. They had to assemble a review quorum. It took 48 seconds. The answer was no. Not 6-1. Unanimous. The High Command had already reviewed the tactical picture. The consequence was at 41% hull integrity. Our forces were reduced from 47 to 44, but remained comprehensively superior. The formation had been restructured. The engagement was proceeding toward the designated outcome. The outcome was still correct. I accepted this. I went back into full chorus resonance. And I watched the consequence position itself for the one viable window, and I watched Vasiliev drink his coffee while it recharged, and I watched the 64 do the things that the 64 were doing, and I did not send another recall request, or a halt request, or a private notation to Vel, because there was nothing left to send, and no vote that was going to change. The window opened 4 minutes and 11 seconds later. The partial array fired. We lost 2 more ships, this time from direct impact rather than system cascade. The shot had hit our reformed formation at the junction of the inner and outer rings, which, and I need to be very specific about this, because it is the part that sat in my chorus record as an unexplained tactical anomaly for 6 full cycles before I understood it, was precisely the junction that would produce maximum disruption to the second restructuring attempt. They had not been positioning for a desperation shot. They had been watching us restructure. They had watched us lose the bloom and fall into the 3-ring formation. And in 4 minutes of recharge time, with a partial array and a ship at 41% hull integrity, and 64 people who were singing and drinking emergency ration coffee, they had analyzed our restructured defensive geometry and found the junction. We had restructured from 47 vessels to 44. 44 was still comprehensively superior. We restructured to 42. 42 was still sufficient to complete the engagement. The chorus reached harmonic certainty again. The consequence was at what our damage assessment called terminal structural integrity. The forward array was gone entirely after the firing sequence. The starboard partial array had discharged, and the recharge window would outlast the ship. The hull was failing in 8 sections now. The propulsion was operating on residual output from a system that should not, by any engineering model we possessed, have still been running at all. The consequence could not fire again. 42 vessels surrounded it. The engagement was concluding. Vasiliev's voice on the channel said, "All stations. We have done the thing. We have done exactly the thing." I sat with that phrasing. We have done the thing. Not victory. Not survival. Not a statement about the battle or the chorus or the 42 ships surrounding them. They had done a thing. The specific thing they had come to do. And then, in a voice that was still settled, still carrying the quality of an old building in familiar weather, Vasiliev said, "Check on the person next to you." One of the 64, somewhere in the failing ship, said, "The person next to me says he's glad he took the window seat." 3 more of them laughed. My harmonic tone broke for the first time in my 41-cycle career. Not for long. A fraction of a second. The chorus record shows it as a notation flag, not an incident report. But Vel noticed, and she sent me nothing, because there was nothing to say, because she had broken first, and she understood what it meant, and you do not send a notation about the thing that has just broken something open. You just hold it. The consequence's hull registered total structural coherence failure across sections 2, 4, 7, 9, and 11, simultaneously, at 0847 collective standard. The engagement concluded. We had won. I remember, in the silence that followed the final damage assessment, sitting very still and listening to the open channel. It was quiet, not because transmission had ended, the channel was still live, but because it was quiet. I had been listening to 64 beings talk and sing and ask about coffee and call each other's names across corridors for the duration of the longest engagement in my 41-cycle career. The channel being quiet was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I filed the after-action report in a voice that did not entirely sound like mine anymore. This is not a metaphor. My chorus record notation patterns had shifted measurably across the length of the engagement. Linguistic analysis showed a progressive reduction in plural voice construction, the we-centric framing that collective tactical records standardize, and an increase in singular voice notation that the record-keeping system flagged as a stylistic anomaly and asked me to review before submission. I submitted it unedited. The report stated, in the formal language of chorus tactical documentation, the following. Engagement with single whisper-grade vessel, ISV consequence, concluded at 0847 collective standard. Outcome, favorable. Enemy vessel destroyed. Formation losses, 5 vessels non-functional, 7 requiring significant repair, 11 requiring minor repair. Total operational reduction from 47 to 31, at engagement close. Formation restructured twice. Command relay damaged, requiring post-engagement replacement. Threat assessment recommendation. Human vessel technology requires reclassification above whisper grade. Revised designation pending. This was what the report said. This is not what I knew. I want to be careful here. I want to be precise, because precision matters more in this part of the account than anywhere else. Because this is the part where I tell you what I actually understood by the time I was sitting alone in my tactical station at 0900 collective standard, with the engagement closed, and the chorus moving into post-operation harmony, and Vel back in full resonance, like nothing had fractured, and the channel quiet. The ISV consequence was not a warship. This is a fact I did not learn until the intelligence report arrived at 0923. Survey class vessel. The designation means, and I had to read this twice to confirm I was parsing the translation correctly, a ship designed to examine unknown environments, catalog new phenomena, map unexplored regions of space. Not a military vessel by human classification standards. A vessel with research instrumentation and sample collection arrays, and a crew that included, according to the manifest, a geologist, 2 atmospheric scientists, and someone whose role was listed as documentation specialist. The consequence had been refitted. Weapons arrays added to the survey frame. Defensive capacity increased from the survey class baseline, which our initial assessment had read as primitive, because it was, relative to a purpose-built human military vessel. A refitted survey ship is not a warship. It is a survey ship with some weapons on it. A survey ship with some weapons on it had restructured our 47-vessel formation twice. The intelligence report noted this in a subordinate clause and moved on. I did not move on. The intelligence report also noted, again in a subordinate clause, formatted as supplementary background data, that the chorus perimeter alarm that the consequence had responded to by turning toward us was a standard identification beacon, the kind that any vessel entering veil space triggers, the kind that broadcasts the presence and size of the chorus fleet at the perimeter. The consequence had received the beacon. It had known, before it turned toward us, exactly what was waiting. 109 people on a refitted survey ship had received the identification beacon for 47 chorus warships and had turned toward it. I sat with this information for a very long time. The intelligence report's final notation was the one that produced the thing I have since understood to be the true conclusion of this engagement, the thing that the chorus logged as a data point, and the High Command filed as a tactical curiosity, and Vel read and responded to with 17 seconds of broken harmony, before returning to the resonance without comment. The notation said, Chorus Signals Intelligence has confirmed that a human fleet, designation Striker class, purpose-built military vessels, experienced combat crew, was in transit at the time of the consequence engagement. Fleet size, 38 vessels. They received the consequence distress signal at 0412. They altered course to veil space at 0413. Estimated arrival, 22 days. They are not reducing speed. I read the second to last line again. They are not reducing speed. I thought about the settled voice, the old building and familiar weather, the cup of something warm raised and lowered between orders, while 3 of the original 109 were still accounted for by the mathematics of the Section 7 breach. I thought about 64. I thought about what Vasiliev had said when the one viable window came, and the partial array fired, and 2 more of our ships went quiet. We have done the thing. They had sent a signal. Not the open-channel audio broadcast at the start of the engagement. That was the small signal, the one that told us they were coming. Not the weapons fire, not the course corrections, not the positioning for the relay shot. The signal was the consequence itself. 109 people on a survey ship had flown into veil space and absorbed everything 47 warships could deliver and kept moving, and in doing so, they had sent a message in the only language that military command structures across every species in the known galaxy understand without translation. The message was, see what we can absorb. Now the 38 purpose-built vessels are coming. Not reducing speed. I closed the intelligence report. I opened a new notation file. In 41 cycles of command, I had maintained my notations in chorus collective voice standard. The we form, the plural, the distributed perspective of a tactical mind in full harmonic resonance with its collective. I started the new file in singular voice. I have been in this business for 41 cycles. I have studied 300 civilizations. 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 Collective standard on the day the consequence crossed our perimeter had never once produced an after-action report that left me uncertain about what I understood. I understand this. A civilization that has spent its entire recorded history in conflict with itself has developed a relationship with cost that no externally peaceful species can replicate. They know what loss looks like from the inside. They have been counting their dead and continuing to function since before they had the tools to record the counting. Every attrition model we possess, every behavioral degradation threshold, every breaking point that our 4 centuries of combat experience has taught us to expect, they have already been past all of it, on themselves, repeatedly. And they are still here, and they are still building ships, and one of those ships, a survey ship with some weapons on it, had taken everything we had. 22 days, 38 purpose-built vessels, not reducing speed. I want to tell you that I filed a recommendation for immediate diplomatic contact. I want to tell you that the Chorus High Command received my recommendation and acted on it, that the outcome of what I understood was translated into policy, that the 22 days were used wisely. I can tell you that I filed the recommendation. The vote came back, 6-1. I am still the one. I am always the one now. This is what the engagement did to me. It took the we, and it gave me I, and it left the I somewhere I did not expect to end up, which is sitting with a dented cup. Not my cup. I do not have a cup. The collective does not have cups. We do not take individual comfort objects on tactical deployments. We have no personal effects lists filed with Fleet Command. We have no Section 7 to lose. But I sat with it anyway. The intelligence report had included, in its final supplementary attachment, a personnel file for Vasiliev, standard background documentation, physical description, age, service history, rank progression, notable engagements, commendations received. And at the bottom of the file, under personal effects filed pre-departure, a 7-item list. Standard protocol. What you carry, documented, so that if you do not come back, what you carried is on record. Item 7. 1 thermal vessel. Dented, non-regulation, sentimental value only. He had packed a list of 7 items. Item 7 was a dented cup. I want you to understand what that means. Not symbolically, not as a literary observation about comfort objects under duress, or the human capacity to carry small pieces of home into large pieces of danger. I mean, he filed a personal effects list. He filed it before departure. He packed a dented cup, and he listed it as Item 7 on a pre-departure personal effects filing, and then he crossed into veil space with 47 warships waiting on the other side of the perimeter. He knew what he was crossing into. He brought the cup anyway. He listed it on the form. Sentimental value only, as if there would be someone to return it to afterward, as if the form meant something, as if the act of listing it was worth doing, regardless of whether the list was ever going to be useful. The chorus does not have a word for what that is. I spent 14 days after the engagement ended trying to build one. 14 days in which I was in full harmonic resonance and performing every tactical function at specification, and filing reports with appropriate precision, and responding to high command queries with the measured, collective voice language of a third harmonic cast tactician with 41 cycles of service. And underneath all of that, quiet and entirely mine, I was building a word. I never completed it. The collective language is not structured for what I was trying to name. It is a language designed for distributed consciousness, for shared understanding, for the kind of meaning that belongs to everyone equally and loses nothing in the belonging. What I was trying to name was the opposite of that. It was the meaning that lives in exactly one dented cup, filed under Item 7, sentimental value only, owned by exactly one person who brought it somewhere and knew they might not bring it back. The chorus language cannot hold that. I am no longer sure I can hold it either, but I carry it, and carrying it is what this account is for. The 38 purpose-built vessels are 8 days out now, based on current trajectory, not reducing speed. In 8 days, I will be in a briefing. The briefing will be longer than 14 seconds. I have filed a formal request for extended assessment time. The High Command has approved 4 minutes. I have prepared materials. The materials include the engagement record, the full damage assessment, the personnel file, the pre-departure personal effects list, Item 7. The materials include what I now know about 11,640 historical entries on human armed conflict behavior, what I know about the specific profile of a species that has been counting its dead and continuing to function since before it had the tools to record the counting. The materials include a translated transcript of the open channel broadcast the consequence transmitted at the start of the engagement. The song, the percussion-heavy melody and the rough-edged voice and the words that translate as, "This will not be quick, and that suits me just fine." The materials include the count, 64, and what Vasiliev said about 64, that is enough. What the materials do not include, what I cannot put in a tactical document and present to a high command quorum using the formal language of Chorus Collective Voice Standard, is this. Terror is not what I expected. I expected it to arrive from outside, to have mass and velocity and a visible weapons signature I could put on a display screen and say, "Here, that shape, that is the thing." Terror is a dented cup listed under Item 7 on a personal effects form. Terror is check on the person next to you. Terror is a species that spent 10,000 years practicing the thing they are now flying 38 purpose-built vessels toward us to do, and did not slow down on the way, and knows exactly what that is worth, and brought a cup for the journey. I have been in this business for 41 cycles. I now understand that I have been doing it in a universe that contained humanity the entire time, and none of my training, none of my harmonic certainty, none of the 4 centuries of combat knowledge that runs through the chorus like blood, prepared me for what it means to fight a species that has already decided what it is willing to lose. 8 days. Not reducing speed. I keep pulling up Item 7. I keep reading it. Sentimental value only. I read it again. I read it again. And somewhere in the chorus, very quiet, entirely mine, the singular voice that used to be a we, says, "We were never ready for this. We just did not know it. Until one ship showed us. One dented cup at a time.